start off with the introduction. I request all the participants to keep their microphones and cameras off at all times. Thank you so much for joining us. I welcome you all to our webinar series, Cambridge in Pakistan, Conversation to Support a Cambridge Learner's Journey. My name is Hira Sajjad. I'm working as a Senior Recognition Manager at Cambridge, Pakistan, and I'm joined by my colleague, Nabia Manear. She is the Recognitions Manager for South of Pakistan. So before we commence with the webinar, I want to share a brief introduction about the recognition function. Our globally recognized qualification enable us to work closely with universities and A-level schools. So the core role of recognition includes ensuring universities' acceptance of our qualifications, including in Pakistan, facilitating students' progression to higher education and bridging the school-university gap, collaborating with institutions to equip students with essential academic and professional talks, and raising awareness of university programs, including emerging opportunities. We have been conducting webinars and to offer insights into the admission policies, requirements, and trends of leading universities, as well as universities in emerging destinations. We have also organized webinars in collaboration with leading national universities as well. Recording of these webinars are available on our Vimeo and YouTube channel. I will also share the links in the chat of this session. Before we proceed forward, I would like to share a few housekeeping guidelines. Please, if you have any questions, you can feel free to post them in the chat. But I would request that if the question should be related to the topic, if there's any other query regarding Cambridge qualifications or the British Council, so you must reach out to the British Council customer services for that. One more thing that we often get a request for is a certificate of attendance for this webinar. So the sessions that we conduct are for free. Therefore, we do not offer any certificates. I would like to reiterate that all the webinar sessions that we conduct are recorded and will be posted on our YouTube and Vimeo channels. And we will also be sharing a link of these recordings with you. Last but not the least, please cooperate with us and keep your mics and cameras off at all times so that everybody can have a good experience and you can get more useful information from the speakers that we have today. So now I hand over to my colleague Nabia to introduce the topic of the webinar and also our esteemed speakers. Over to you, Nabia. Thank you.
Thank you, Hira, for introducing me and taking us through the function and all details. I'm also going to further add that the topics of these webinars are very carefully designed to offer the most comprehensive details regarding university applications. So in case you have a topic in mind, please feel free to suggest those on the chat. For this webinar, the next step forward, researching the right fit, we believed it would be best to collaborate with UCAS because we chose to include this considering students' preference for studying in the UK. While it goes without saying that most of you are already familiar with the UCAS, and it is an independent charity and the shared admissions service for higher education in the UK. Through this webinar, we would like you all to get more hands-on knowledge on how students can choose the right fit, what exactly does the right fit mean, and how both of you and the students can use the service to find the opportunity that best matches the students' preference, their passion, and their interests. Before I introduce the speakers, again, I'm going to say that we will be taking questions at the end. So please feel free to use the chat to share your questions. You may as well put down your name and your school that you're associated with along with your question. So it's easier for us to just remember the questions and also where you're from. I'm now going to introduce our brilliant speakers who have now taken the time to join us today. Becca Horsley is the Customer Success Partner, International Advisors at UCAS. Becca joined UCAS to support with delivering targeted training to the growing community of schools and agents who support the 1 in 5 UCAS applicants. Prior to joining UCAS, Becca worked for many years in a variety of universities in the UK in the international recruitment and admissions team and was an international student herself. Our second speaker is Courtney Grange. Courtney is the International Development Officer at UK. He has extensive experience providing direct support to the higher education providers, advisors, applicants, and all aspects of the UCAS undergraduate process. In his current role, Courtney's focus is on international student mobility. This includes developing and nurturing relationships with stakeholders involved in supporting international students. Thank you, Becca and Courtney, for collaborating with us for today's session. So the floor is all yours now. I'm going to take down the slides and you can project yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I will just share my screen now, and just bear with me for one moment, please. Okay. So today, we're going to talk you through a little bit of data about Pakistan, because understanding what's currently happening with Pakistani students can help with understanding that best fit and what kind of profile students are already looking at. I'm going to then lead you through some key dates in the cycle just to remember where we're at and what we should be aiming towards. I'll then hand over to Courtney, who's going to explain about that best fit as a topic. Then we'll speak about some of the technicalities of the application system and how that best fit links back to the personal statement, which is what you should be aiming for, obviously completing that as part of a successful application. And then we'll finish up with some of the ways that UCAS can support you and your students. And just a quick mention, as you can see, Courtney is actually pictured in this slide here. If anyone is interested in finding out more, we will be holding our international conference in Edinburgh in June for people to attend.
I think Becca got off the line.
Hi, sorry,
Hi,
I
Becca.
just got kicked. Yes, hi, I'm back. Sorry, I just got kicked out. But it's okay. We will go back from the slide I was just on. This is the joys of virtual presenting. So we'll just go back to this slide. So just mentioning that this was our conference that people are able to attend. If anyone is interested in finding out more about that, I will put the link in the chat after the presentation. But it's a way for you to meet with people in person and understand more about what UCAS has to offer. But looking at some trends for Pakistan. So this is our end of cycle data. So what's taken when everybody has confirmed the places they're going to, everything's finished. And this normally happens in the autumn at the end of the year. So for example, the students that are applying to study in 2024 September, that end of cycle data will come a little bit after that once everyone has settled into their places. So as you can see here, there's been a really big increase in applicants from Pakistan from 5 years ago. However, the 2024 end of cycle data, there was a bit of a drop since the 2023 data. However, the acceptances has kind of stayed at a relatively level percentage. It's increased since 5 years ago. So the acceptance rate of about 39–40%, that's pretty stable for the past few years. And compared to other international markets, so we tend to see for international students, the acceptance rate sits somewhere between about 30 and low 60s. So you're kind of in the middle of that, so nothing to be concerned about. But it is good to see that that's been stable across the last 2 cycles. In terms of trends, so looking at what kind of subjects students are applying for and where they're applying across the 4 nations. So the nations that people are applying to is quite unique. I haven't typically seen this many students applying to Wales, which is very interesting to understand. Perhaps from your perspective, you could put in the chat why you think that might be. We know there was a Study in Wales campaign, so whether that's something that really influenced your students, or perhaps you've had experience with visiting Welsh institutions and have been promoting those to your students. There's also a slightly higher rate of Northern Irish applicants than we tend to see as well, which is really good to see that your students are diversifying across the 4 nations of the UK. The Scotland numbers are a little lower than we tend to see for international students, but I suspect that's because the students have gone to Wales, Northern Ireland instead, because England is pretty much as expected. In terms of the courses, again, there's nothing in there that's super surprising for international students, though it is nice to see law so high up, nearly as high as computing. And it's good to see social sciences as well. Again, I'd be interested to see broken down which social sciences you're seeing your students apply to. But just to make you aware that those courses are falling largely in line with the trends of most other countries international students are coming from. So to look at some key dates for the application cycle that we are in the middle of, obviously you can see on here tomorrow is a very important day. It's our equal consideration date on the 29th of January. We have obviously passed the October deadline, so I'll just go back to that one first and talk you through that before we move on to what's happening tomorrow. So we have an October deadline, which is for courses in medicine, veterinary science or medicine, and dentistry, or any course at Oxford and Cambridge. And when you're working with that best fit for your student, it's really important that you know about that early application deadline, because the students working towards that are the ones you need to be working with that little bit earlier in the process. So knowing about what they're going to be looking at to study and working to make sure they've got the kind of profile for that course from a bit of a younger age, a bit earlier in your school time, is really good to know to give them the best chances of success. And the reason that we have that is because most of those courses are the ones which are highly competitive. Most will have things like interviews, which you need to be preparing and working with your students for as well. There are a few special regulations for these courses. So normally on UCAS, you can apply to 5 courses for your students. For anything on the 15th of October deadline, those 4 courses listed there, you can apply to 4 of the courses listed on there, and then your 5th choice needs to be something different. So for example, you can apply to 4 medicine programs, and then your 5th would be something like biomedical sciences typically. And again, when you're thinking about best fit, it's important to make sure that that 5th choice is still something that your student is interested in studying. It's something that's going to lead them into the kind of career path they want to be taking, and just understanding how that fits with those other 4 programs. In terms of Oxford and Cambridge, again, you cannot apply to both. You have to pick between Oxford and Cambridge. And with that best fit, it's really important to do that research and see which one of those institutions and which syllabus for the course that you're interested in studying is going to suit the needs of your student best, to make sure they're going to have a great time while they're studying there, and it's going to meet the academic outcomes that they want to achieve. For all other courses at other institutions, we have our equal consideration date, which is what's happening tomorrow. Both of those deadlines have a 6 p.m. UK cutoff for meeting that deadline. You're at an advantage as obviously you're ahead of us in terms of time zones, so you're not having to get up really early to meet that deadline, which is great for you. But just bear in mind that everything submitted after that 6 p.m. UK is considered a late application. The equal consideration date is to ensure that universities don't close their courses. So everybody who is applying by that date should be considered fairly and equally. They can still apply after this date all the way up until the 30th of June, but be aware that the very competitive courses, very competitive institutions may have closed their courses. So you might need to get a little bit more creative with what your students are applying to and where they're looking at studying. But if you're working with a student who hasn't quite figured it out yet, sometimes it can be better to wait until after that deadline to make sure they're putting in for the right courses for them. We do have something called UCAS Extra, so that will open on the 26th of February, and this is available to anybody who has already used up their 5 choices and they are not currently holding an offer. So they could be not holding an offer because maybe they didn't receive an offer, or perhaps they received an offer and they decided that they've changed their mind. Maybe they don't want to go to that university. Maybe they've changed their mind about which course. So that's fine. They would just need to decline any offers they're holding, and then they can use that UCAS Extra process. In the extra process, they can add 1 course at a time. So they really do need to think carefully because it's one, it's not adding 5 at once like with the previous part of the process. And this is included in the same application fee as that main program entry that they've already entered. So they don't have to pay anything additional to use that. We also have our clearing process, which is open throughout the summer. And this is to support students who, again, maybe have changed their minds about the institution or the course. Perhaps they didn't receive the grades that they were looking for as part of their offer, or perhaps they've overachieved on the grades that they were looking for, and that's opened up more opportunities to them. And again, having a kind of backup plan about what you're going to do with your students regarding clearing and how they're going to research where else they might like to study on that tighter time frame is a key part of this best fit. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Courtney now to talk about the different factors that fall into a best fit decision for your students.
Amazing. Thank you, Becca, and good afternoon all. So yes, a very broad slide in terms of those research and what is the best fit. And I suppose the things to consider, which kind of ties into the former slide about the whole research process that goes into the application journey as well. So just to begin in the top left, so in the UK in terms of higher education degree programs, so an undergraduate degree, there isn't a fixed curriculum, meaning two named degrees for the same name entirely can be entirely different in terms of the modules, what's studied, and even things like learning styles. So be that it could be exam driven, it could be coursework driven. So I would say that would firstly be a quick consideration to keep in mind for your students or for those researching. So, for instance, I think, Becca, if I can use one of your own examples, doing an English degree, I believe it was kind of more modern text and more modern literature that you would have studied. Where if you were looking at something more kind of prehistoric or more kind of further away, that's something to keep in mind as well. In terms of the entry requirements as well, so in terms of from the UCAS application, you do have up to 5 choices on the form, which are entirely invisible, meaning if you apply to a university, choice 1 couldn't see choice 2 and vice versa and choice 3, so it's completely invisible how you list them. But in terms of considering what choices to add, looking at the entry requirements in terms of that research as well is a good starting place. So in terms of finding those on the university websites, you'll typically find the typical kind of entry requirements, what you'll find in different courses. But if you didn't see your qualification there or your students, it could be worth checking with the university, just for some further guidance on that as well. So in terms of rankings as well, so when considering an institution, some rankings are very, very broad in terms of the listings, how they are, but some are broken down into subjects as well. So considering the kind of if you have a course in mind or a student has for a very specific kind of course or topic, it could be worth looking at kind of individual subject rankings as well. And then looking at things like the career prospects, alumni, what kind of comes after that as well. So on the slides to procedures, we do have some of our free resources, which are subject guides and city guides and things like that as well. But considering things like the location as well for that broader experience that ties into the whole kind of process too. So as well as looking at what to study, considering your student would be in the UK for 3 years by the very least of studying, considering the location and what kind of goes into that as well, which does tie nicely into social activity. So within the university, aside from the actual course itself, what goes into that? So it could be kind of society.
Apologies, everyone. I think there's another glitch. Perhaps our presenters have left the meeting. We'll add them again.
Hi, I'm still here, so I'll just carry on till Courtney returns. So again, just on those last few points that we were looking at, with rankings, it is very, very important that you don't just look at the headline figure of rankings when trying to find the best fit, that you're also understanding things, again, using myself, Courtney used very well my English degree as an example for course content learning style. But for rankings, so the institution that I went to was not a top 10 institution overall, but for my course program, it was ranked number 1 for the course that I was going to take. So make sure that you're looking at the different factors that go into making up rankings, and also make sure that you're understanding things outside of the academics, because some will look at things like student satisfaction scores, research output, but for a bachelor's degree, if you're not going to be doing research, that may be something that you're not particularly concerned about considering in terms of the output. I think we'd got up to
Oh, sorry about
you're
that. I
back.
was
It's
mid-flow there.
okay.
Yes,
It's okay.
I
apologies,
think
it dropped me
Courtney's
out.
back. Yeah.
But thank
Okay,
you for picking
I'll
that
hand
up.
back over
Thank
to
you for
Courtney.
that. That is grand. And yeah, and if you're able to pop onto the following slide. Also, I think there was just one on cost as well. So just considering that into the kind of the journey as well. So besides from like the tuition of the course itself, so kind of the cost of maintenance of living as well is something to strongly consider too. So for instance, is there scholarships available? Considering different locations. So for instance, if there's a university in a city compared to maybe a more rural area, the cost of living can be quite considerable between the two as well. So I would say factoring that in as a final point to consider for the best fit. And if I could have the following slide, thank you. And then, yes, and just kind of tying into this, there's some more practical resources that kind of fall into it as well. So these are all on our website, ucas.com. And specifically, when a student visits the website and then signs in, we'll be taken to a UCAS hub as well with all these different widgets that can be favorited and start building those resources all in the same place. So just to talk through a few of these, so firstly the city and location guides. So just calling into the previous point there, in terms of aside from studying the course itself and finding that right program, it's worth strongly considering if kind of the location as well is something that would be, would be what the student is looking for. So for instance, a student might be quite considering of like a city location rather than rural, or maybe vice versa, calls into the kind of cost of living as well. So we have city and subject and location guides as well that can really build those profiles, particularly useful for a student who might not be able to visit the city before applying or before enrolling on the course as well. We do have subject tasters and guides as well. So these are free resources designed by universities to kind of do a real kind of whistle stop tour of a course itself. So for instance, it might be part of a module, like a short course, and it starts building up what the course might entail. So when calling into the research,
I think we lost Courtney again.
Okay, I'll carry on. So we're on the subject tasters and guides. Again, so as we mentioned, these are really useful for maybe working with those students who perhaps they've heard of a certain course and they think it might be something they're interested in, but they're not quite sure what actually entails studying that at a higher level at university. So it's really important they can have a read through that, and all of these resources are free. So they can look at as many as they want, and they can really use as go through them with their advisors as well, go through them with their families to help them understand if that course is going to be right for them. We also have something called subject tasters, and these are relatively new on the UCAS website. And these have been developed in partnership with universities, and they're kind of short courses, about an hour long, most of them, where they can actually take a class delivered by a professor of the university. It's pre-recorded, but then there are tasks that they can complete surrounding that. So again, if they are able to sit through an hour of it, that gives them a good feel for what it would be like to take that course at university level. If they're thinking after an hour, oh, this is really not what I want to be doing, it's not particularly interesting to me, again, that's great because they've eliminated an option rather than spending 3 years studying something which is then not what they want to be taking overall. So it's great to have a kind of try before you buy with those programs. We have something called the virtual work experiences as well, which is where students get the opportunity to work with companies and they'll be given tasks to complete, and they will be meaningful tasks. It's not just things like go through and sort out my junk emails. It will be relevant to the role that they're working in. And that's a really good way for them to, again, understand if it's a career that they would like to go into after they've completed the degree that they're undertaking. Because ultimately, at the end of whatever degree they're studying, they are going to need to get work, hopefully in the field that they've studied. So it's a good way to understand how that degree progresses onto a career path. Most of these are available internationally. There are a few which are targeted at certain regions within the UK. So just make sure that you are checking the eligibility requirements before passing these on to your students. But again, those are available for free, no payment needed from the students to take those. Just going to see if Courtney has rejoined
I
us yet.
am. Apologies, it kept bringing
It's
me up,
okay.
but yes, I'm back. I tried to be succinct to try and run through those. Yeah, so there is actually the following slide is specifically on our partnership with UniBuddy. So we're kind of going that a bit more broader. But it's just fine. I think you were touching on there back with the career quiz as well. So in terms of calling back into the best fit, the research that goes into things, we have a career quiz, which I did take this morning and got higher education professional, which is always reassuring. But aside from that as well in the results, it gives a kind of a broad breakdown of kind of like personality traits, career pathways as well. So yes, just to conclude this slide, lots of resources that kind of factor into that research as well. If I could take the next slide, thank you. And yeah, and there was a kind of a specific side on one of the tools we have, which is UniBuddy, which is a widget within the UCAS site with our partnership as well. And what this is the opportunity to speak directly to students that are enrolled in a university or have been to kind of ask those questions that you really want to kind of get from a kind of a primary student experience. And sometimes questions as well. So I would say there isn't such thing as a bad question that you might want to ask a university entirely. But if it's something more anecdotal to a student level, we do have that connection now on UniBuddy as well. And I would say also calling back into the wider picture of UCAS and all of these research tools. So when you pop into ucas.com, sign in and register, you will find all of these widgets separately there and can start favoriting as well. And it will start remembering those preferences. So I did want to bring that into the framework. So aside from the application itself, you can start using all of those and keeping that picture built as well for the research.
Thank you, Courtney. So I'm now going to talk. Oh, sorry, it's unshared my presentation. I will just reshare that with you. I'm having a few technical issues. But yeah, we're going to talk you through some of the tech changes that we've made to support you with your applications. So these are already in progress for the 2025 cycle. So hopefully you've seen these if you're working towards getting your students ready for that deadline tomorrow. So we've added a where you live section, and this is to collect address history for the past 3 years prior to the start date of the course. So for those 2025 autumn starters, we're collecting this data from September 2022. We've enhanced the residency and nationality questions. Hey, sorry, just resharing again. So the reason that we've made those changes is anybody who's worked with a student that has a complex fee status will know that they were getting a lot of requests from the universities to provide additional information, so documents about their nationality, their potential requirements for a visa, as well as their address history. So UCAS is not going to be making the decisions using this information, but by collecting it as part of the application process, we're aiming to streamline this. Rather than students being contacted 5 times by 5 different universities, we're hoping to streamline so they're only having to input that information once. We've also made a few changes for the education section. So there's improved search function for qualifications. We've moved, if you're working with any students who require an English language test, rather than completing that as part of their qualifications, that has moved into the education section. And for anyone who is linked to a UCAS registered centre, that centre will be pre-populated in the school part of the education section, and it will also automatically show the students the qualification from the country where they indicate the school is. So it will show them the qualifications from Pakistan first, but because you're obviously taking these Cambridge qualifications, what you can do is set up in your registered centre qualifications shortlist to make sure that you've selected the right qualifications on offer at your school, and that will make sure that your students are being shown those as the priority, and that prevents errors when they're submitting their application by you showing them the courses that your school is offering. They can also manually search for qualifications, so they could put in A levels, for example, and that would show them a list of available options to choose between. And then the big change for UCAS in terms of the application process will be starting for students applying for 2026 entry. So the students that you're working with next year. So historically, the personal statement has been one long piece of writing, 4,000 characters, but we are going to be changing the structure. And the reason for this is to better support people who are maybe applying to multiple different educational systems. We know that the UK personal statement is very different from the personal essay that they're expecting in the US. It's also to support the significant number of international students and UK mature students who are applying without the support of a careers advisor, a teacher at their school. Some are applying independently. So we want to support them with knowing what it is that they need to be including. And we really hope that this empowers people to feel that they are putting in a good personal statement and understanding the content that's being requested of them by the universities. So going forwards for the 2026 applications, so that's the people wanting to start their studies in September 2026, it will move into a 3-section approach, and each section will have a question prompt, which will tell the student what the university is expecting to see. It will still be 4,000 characters, and that will be split across the 3 sections, and each section will have a minimum character count of 350. We have already started releasing a lot of advice and guidance about this, and we'll be putting out some more student-facing advice going forward. The key point, though, to remember is that the purpose of the statement is remaining clear. It's still really to show that passion, that interest in studying that course, and what makes your student a strong candidate to take that course at degree level. And that's where that best fit is really important, because by putting people into courses that are a good fit for them, they're going to have lots and lots of examples and context to put in this personal statement, because they will be able to show how what they've done up to the point of application has made them a good fit for that program. And just to point out, it will be the same person at the university being able to see all 3 parts of this statement. So if you accidentally put something in question 2 that should be in question 3, no need to worry about that. It will all be seen by the same admissions team, so your student wouldn't be penalised for that. And here are your questions. So anybody who has already supported students with their personal statements, is there anything in these questions you can put in the chat? Is there anything in those questions that is shocking to you that you have not been telling your students to include in their personal statements? We worked with the admissions teams at university with students to test this and with advisors to understand how to formulate these questions. And we run them through focus groups to make sure that it's getting out the information that's needed. So for question 1, why do you want to study this course or subject? That's very much about the motivations of your student. And this will vary student to student depending on what that course is intended to support them with in their future. So it could be that best fit is very much about their interest in the subject, but it could be about needing that particular degree to get them to a certain place in their life. For example, if you want to be a lawyer, you need to have a background in law to be able to practice law. But it could be, for example, again, myself, I studied an English literature and American studies degree. I didn't have a particular career in mind, so I was taking those subjects because I was particularly interested in exploring them at a higher level. For most people, it may be a combination of the two, of both their prior interest and also their future plans. So for example, medicine, you probably have that interest in anatomy, biology, but you also require that medical degree to go on and practice. And then how your qualifications and studies have helped you to prepare for your course or subject. So here we want you to reflect on what you've been studying previously. So you can reflect on the actual content. So again, medicine as an example, perhaps when you were taking your biology class, you really enjoyed the unit on the heart, and that led you to want to become a cardiologist specifically. And you can reflect about how that specific module information and content has supported you with preparing for your course at university. You can also reflect on transferable skills. So perhaps in one of your classes, you had to do a lot of group work, and that has prepared you through it being a skill that you've learned as part of your program to succeed on a business degree, because there will be that collaborative work as part of that. And then what you've done to prepare outside of education, and why are these experiences useful? So these are your extracurriculars, and thinking about how those link back to the specific program. So we tend to say, to ask people to justify why they are including something. So it's great if people have a lot of hobbies, a lot of sports, music, art, volunteering experience, but they need to link that back to why they are a good fit for the course they're applying to study. So for example, if a student is the captain of a football team, that's impressive, but they need to link that to, again, the leadership skills that's taught them, the good communication, and that would make them a strong candidate to work in a specific role, because they're going to be leading a team if they go into that profession. Or perhaps they were working as the treasurer for the sports society that they're in. That's taught them good financial management, which is going to be important if they're doing a degree that involves a high level of numbers. And with this, it's really about reflecting, and that important point as part of this process is students understanding how all of these things that they've done in their life come together to make them a good fit for the program, and that the program is a good fit for them. And just a quick reminder here that the same personal statement will go to all of the universities they've applied to, so all 5 choices. So make sure that they're not naming a specific university in there. They're not saying things like, I'm so excited to be in this city, because that is not what their personal statement is meant to talk about. It's meant to explain their passion for the subject that they're going to be taking at university. Then just a few top tips for applications. These are the points where we see international students are most commonly making errors. So accurate personal details. Just remember that the date of birth should be in the UK format, not the American format. I know if sometimes you're working with multiple global systems, it can get a bit confusing to know what to fill in where. And the name as well. So if students have a preferred name that they are using, for the purposes of the UCAS application, they need to represent their name as it is on their passport and their academic documents, just to make sure that we can confirm those qualifications are held by that student. They can indicate what they'd like us to call them as part of the application, but we do need to see their full legal name. Paying attention to communications and deadlines, that's really important to both the UCAS deadlines, but universities may also set additional deadlines if they've requested information from the students. That research into that best fit is key, so make sure that they are using all of those resources that Courtney highlighted, speaking to those ambassadors, if they have the opportunity to speak to university staff as well, which kind of links with point 4 about reaching out. If you or your students are struggling with anything, you can reach out to us at UCAS, you can reach out to the universities directly. Their admissions recruitment team will be happy to support you, and reach out to current students. So whether that's using UniBuddy or you've got your own alumni networks within your schools, it's a really good way to help students feel secure that they have chosen a good fit for them. And then if you are a UCAS registered centre, using your qualification shortlist just to make sure that the correct qualifications, the correct syllabus is being chosen to prevent those errors. We can fix it at UCAS, but it takes quite a bit of time. So just to try and speed up the process, make it smoother for your students, we recommend using that shortlist to make it simpler for everybody. And just to flag as well, we have a parents guide, which is free to download off our website. You can pass it to the parents you're working with. And we have specific international pages in here as well. One is all about the arrivals process, so the accommodation, what to do about getting things like your data plan set up when you come to the UK. And one is about financing your studies. I'm going to hand back over to Courtney quickly to talk you through the ways that we at UCAS can support you as advisors. And then we will take some questions afterwards. We'll go through the chat first, and then anyone who wants to come on camera and see their questions as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Becca. And yeah, and a nice, I guess, slide to kind of recap and some of those resources as well, and some practical steps to kind of complement the former slides as well. So one of which is our monthly newsletter. So as being monthly, it's very relevant to the UCAS cycle. So for instance, at the moment, it'll be about the UCAS consideration date. It'll be about confirmation and clearing as we go into the summer. So a real place to kind of keep ahead of the curve is subscribing for our monthly newsletters. Similarly, we have advisor live sessions as well that we run that are quite similar to this. So again, it's usually cycle dependent. So usually a month before something's happening. So previously it'll be the equal consideration deadline again, and it'll be a way to kind of get on top of those and start kind of getting an idea of what's coming up next in UCAS. So we have training and conferences as well. So we can look at bespoke, kind of what events are happening. So one of which is our international conference, which is coming up, which dates are released as well. So that can be found on there too. But other things as well for professional development. So looking at those as well is how you can then best support your students. And then formerly the team that I was in, which was our customer success team supporting advisors directly. So on ucas.com/advisors, if you are a registered UCAS centre, you can start using those tools to kind of manage applications. So for instance, you'll have an application list, a tracking list as well, and then what's coming up as well in terms of the next parts of the cycle, so news events and other things too. So yeah, just a quick wrap up there. So what's available? So kind of newsletters, advisor live sessions as well in training. So all of those resources that can support you to support your students.
Thank you very much, Courtney. So what we'll do now is we'll read through the questions in the chat, see what people have got, and then if we've got a little bit of time left, we can see if there's anything else that people want to raise with us. But let's have a quick look. Okay. Okay, so I think the only question specifically is about the HSSC qualification. So universities for international students can set their own entry requirements. So I would recommend looking directly on the university websites to understand if they're willing to consider that as a qualification, because UCAS doesn't set the entry requirements. So it would be best to speak directly to the universities about that question. But thank you for that. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to ask us? Or anyone from Cambridge has something they'd like to ask? Or us to go back over, perhaps?
Thanks for picking up that question from the chat, Becca. I would request the participants, if they have any question, they can raise their hand, and then one by one they can open their mic and ask, or perhaps if they want to write it in the chat.
Yep, either of those is fine.
There's another question in the chat from Habiba. She's asking, how do we become UCAS certified?
Okay, do you mean to become a UCAS registered centre, Habiba? If you just clarify, I think that's what you're meaning.
Yeah, I think that's what she means.
Okay, so we have a process where what we will do is ask you to complete an application form, and we'll ask a few details about how you are supporting your students, and just your school information, things like your finance correspondent and things like that, what advice you're going to be giving to your students. We will then want to look at your website and do a few background checks. And then if that's all successful, which most of the time it is, I know Courtney's worked on this as well, it's quite rare that we're not able to approve somebody. It can take a little bit of time because we have got quite a lot of requests at the moment, but it's a completely free process. If you're applying around now, you should be in a good place to be set up ready for the next academic intake. But once we've assessed that and you become a centre, you get access to things like our professional development platform, where there are additional training resources that you can use. It makes it a lot easier for you because you can see the back end of the application as well. When you're speaking to our help team on the phones, it's a lot easier for them to see what's going on. I don't know if Courtney, you have anything to add. I'll just grab the link for the form and put it in the chat.
Yeah, and I just compliment that final point you made, Becca. So when a centre or when a school or college is a registered UCAS centre, so in terms of managing applications, it does become a lot more simplistic in terms of seeing those in real time, and as Becca mentioned, looking at the back end of the website. So for instance, if a student is applying independently, the only, I guess, where the school would fit into it is there's a reference section and one person will be emailed directly, and that's the only part. Whereas if it's a registered centre, there'll be an application management kind of tab, a kind of a tool, and we'll be able to see all of the applications, what status they're at, and can start using tracking as well to see what's there and what's available, and can have multiple staff members. So yeah, I would just echo on that point that it's much easier in terms of managing applications as well.
Yep. Okay. Was there any other questions from anybody?
If the participants have any questions, they can put them down in the chat or also turn on their mics and cameras. If not, then I have a couple of questions that we had come across a few when we met the counselors. So
Okay.
what are some kind of queries that you guys generally receive from students?
Ooh. Okay.
Yeah, I can jump in a few of those there. So it's really cycle dependent, I would say. So for instance, at the moment, a lot of the calls or contacts that will be coming through will be about submitting an application. So at the moment, particularly if a student is independent, so they're not linked to a UCAS registered centre, it may be about references. So in order to submit a UCAS application, the reference has to be completed before the application is sent. And by reference, meaning like a letter of recommendation. But as this kind of cycle progresses, it'll be a lot about UCAS services. So as kind of Becca mentioned about things like UCAS Extra, UCAS Clearing, it'll be a breakdown of how those work as well. But I would say broadly, in terms of the queries that come directly from students, it will be relevant to where we are in the cycle in the application process.
Okay, great. And do you get questions about scholarships as well?
We do. It does come up, and I particularly say from our social media channels, actually, just reflecting back when I was more student facing. So typically we would direct to the higher education provider. So what's available, be that something that could be like country specific, what a university is running. But yes, those queries do come up as well. And within the kind of the framework, so with UCAS being where the application is run, and there's the finances, scholarships, and so much that pings into there as well, we would usually direct to a university directly, but it is something that does come up as a query generally throughout the year, particularly as we are now with applications being submitted.
I think as well,
Okay.
British Council sometimes has a list of compiled scholarships on their site. So have a quick look there as well if you're trying to look for them all in one place together.
Thank you, Becca and Courtney. There's one more question that I've received for undergraduate applications. What exactly does the live at home, yes or no part mean? And which should students select for availing accommodation on campus?
Okay, so living at home, I suspect, wouldn't be relevant for many of your students because the courses are taught in person. It would more be for UK students who maybe are already living in the city they're applying to go to university in. So it would be just indicating to the university that they're going to remain living with their family. They're not going to be wanting to live on campus. So that's, yeah, like I said, probably not relevant to anybody who's in this session today. And sorry, what was the second part of that question about the accommodation?
Yeah, that's which should students select for availing accommodation on campus?
So again, it's completely up to them which accommodation they would be interested at. Typically, universities are aware of the fact that international students, they won't know the city as well. Even obviously, UK students move around in the city they apply to university, but they will still have a better understanding of the city than an international student would. So they may have rooms reserved for international students on campus. So make sure you understand that. Certain universities are what we call campus based. So everything is all in one place. And then others will maybe be a bit more city-based, so the accommodation, they might have to travel a little bit across the city to do that. There are also private accommodation providers which are aimed specifically at students. Those tend to be a little bit pricier than the university offered accommodation, but then they may also have additional resources. For example, I know that some in the city I live in, they have things like games rooms, so it depends what kind of experience your student is wanting. There's also, if they have any family in the city, they are perfectly welcome to live with the family members that are already there, or they can also rent a house privately if that's what they're wanting to do. I would say, having done that myself when I went to study internationally, that's quite a tricky process, especially for the first year. So I would probably recommend going down one of the student accommodation routes initially, but it depends on what, again, that best fit for the student. If they feel they want to be in that private accommodation self-managed, that is something that's definitely permitted as well. Okay, I think we've got a few more questions.
There's one more
chat.
question in the chat. Yes.
Okay, so, well, on the surface, it does look like we only offer the 5 applications. Because of the extra and the clearing process, some students are actually able to add additional choices. So if the student is worried that I've got 5 options, if I don't succeed, that's my UK study options completely closed to me. It's not, because that's what the extra process is for. So if they've applied to their 5 universities, aren't successful, they can add as many extra choices as they want, just one at a time. They can keep adding those until they receive something that they are happy with, they want to accept and go and study. So they could, in theory, have probably 15 applications if they're using that extra process from day 1 in February. And then they can also use the clearing process as well. But we do think that because the UK is a bit more focused than a lot of countries in their degree studies, that students need to be really doing that research, because not everywhere, as Courtney said, is going to offer the same syllabus, the same course content. So we're asking them to, as part of that research process, make sure that they are understanding what it is they're applying to, and they're applying to quite similar programs to get that content that they need. So it's good for them to have that narrow focus to make sure they are doing that research and picking things that are a good fit for them, rather than just kind of applying and seeing what happens. So that focus is important in the UK. And then
just to jump on that question
Oh
as
yeah, of
well,
course.
sorry, as well, just like an afterthought actually, because it ties in with ECD, the equal consideration date, quite nicely. But when an application is submitted by the equal consideration date, so for this year by 6 p.m. kind of tomorrow as it will be, it does set a deadline for the universities as well to make their decisions as well, which falls in the middle of May, and then in June students have a reply by date as well. So as Becca was saying, absolutely, in terms of extra and clearing as well, there are opportunities if a student was unsuccessful or declined their choices to still keep looking. But also as well from the university side, just so a student isn't kind of waiting indefinitely, just so they can start planning as well. They do get set a deadline as well in May for applications that were submitted by the equal consideration date.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's really useful to hear as well. And then Yusra's question about the visa. So obviously we have had an election relatively recently, but as things stand at the moment, there has been no indication that this is due to change. But obviously make sure that if you're working with students in the future, you are checking this. I can only give you the information as it is now, but we do currently offer a 2-year graduate visa for students who have completed within the UK. We're not allowed to give any particular visa advice, but there is something called the UKVI, which is a really useful website. You can read more information about the visas and eligibility, things like that. They'll be able to support you with those kind of questions. But as I said, just keep an eye on it, because with a change of government, we're hoping obviously it will remain the same, and there's no indication it will change, but always, as with anything, make sure you're keeping up to date if you're working with students a year or 2 in the future.
Thank you, Becca and Courtney. I think I'm just going to add one last question if others don't have any other questions. Considering what we talked about, the personal statements and how they can be more effective, what is one piece of advice that you would give out to the students and the student counselors to help students prepare personal statements that are not really, I would say, cliche, but also considering that there are like a lot of AI softwares, how does the student stand out from the rest, or in and how can they like ensure that their personal statement is not really monotonous, or it has that factor so the universities will accept them.
Okay, I'll go first, and then if you want to add another tip on the end, Courtney.
Absolutely, certainly.
So first of all, let me just tell you quickly about the AI, our guidelines are regarding that. So we do have similarity detection software built into the application form, and we will pass the information about percentage of similarity to the universities. So we would recommend that if students are using AI, it's probably going to end up flagging on the similarity detection if they're just copying and pasting, because there's only so many ways the AI can say, I want to study business because. But we do say that AI can be used in the very initial stages of writing to help students with structuring, to help them with kind of understanding what might go into which question. But then they need to take that away and add that kind of human touch to it, because ultimately it is a personal statement. It needs to be a reflection of that student. And also, if the student is looking to genuinely study this subject for 3 years, to write 4,000 characters on why that subject excites them shouldn't be something that's a huge challenge to them. Of course, for the language, the grammar, things like that, it's fine to use as a supporting method, but the actual content should be something that they're quite excited and passionate to write about, because this is something that they supposedly have the greatest interest in studying out of everything available to them. And then in terms of top tips, what I would say is start the research process and building up your evidence to include early, because the more that students have done, the more they will have to include on different examples. So for example, if you're working with a student from kind of age 13, 14, tell them to go and watch TED Talks on the topic, tell them to go to museums where they can, tell them to read books that are outside of their curriculum, because then they'll have so much to say that it will be different from what's available from other students, because nobody will have had the exact same academic journey. Tell them to even look at more modern resources, so they can use things like influencers and podcasts if they have those in their subject area. And there's such a wide array of things that they can use to evidence that they should definitely be able to draw out those points of interest and make it different from what other people are submitting. And then Courtney, I don't know if you had a tip as well.
Yeah, and I definitely compliment that. And calling back to the anecdote you used earlier in the presentation about football and kind of extracting those transferable skills as well, we'd definitely say doing that. And I was going to mention the evidence as well. So reading material, podcasts, and otherwise, how those can be used to kind of demonstrate enthusiasm as well. I suppose another tip, more broadly speaking, it can be sometimes a bit of like a work backwards mentality. So what I mean by that is if a student is applying for a course, maybe for a career path or just to kind of strengthen a depth of interest in a cause, it can be worth having that kind of target and then using the personal statement to kind of express why you're applying for the course. So for instance, I've researched I want to be a doctor. Doing this course in medicine, for instance, could kind of get me there. These are things that I've done, at the moment and why I feel I'd be a successful student. So I suppose trying to capture why a student feels they'll be successful on the course, but then looking as well where the course might get them from A to B. So looking at that kind of target, that kind of end goal, and then using and expressing why the course gets a person to there. So yeah, the evidence as well, but that's just some further thoughts I had too.
Okay, thank you. As someone who's read personal statements when I worked in the admission offices, it is very clear when a student is genuinely interested in the course versus they've either had someone else write the statement, or perhaps they aren't really interested in it. They're just thinking, oh, that's a well-paid job, rather than having that genuine passion. So you, as the people advising students, just make sure that you kind of feel that passion from them as well. And that's part of that best fit we spoke about earlier. I think we've just got one more question. Sorry. So Rabia's asked about AI from the teacher's point of view. So we wouldn't give markdown based on if the teachers used AI. We would say that we don't have an official policy on this actually, but I would say that you can certainly use it to improve grammar and expression, but because we are not, well, the universities are not assessing your work for those things. Some people will just write in bullet points about the student. It doesn't need to be a formal written piece of writing. It just needs to get the points across about the student. So please don't worry if you feel that you are phrasing something a bit awkwardly because that's how it fits within the characters. But no, we wouldn't really investigate if a teacher's been using AI to write the reference part of the process. But yeah, so that would be at your discretion. But it is a relatively small amount of characters to be writing. And we would say that it should remain personal, especially the section 3 of the reference where you're talking about how you feel the student is a good fit, because again, it's quite hard for AI to capture that sentiment. So there isn't an official policy, but just keep in mind that obviously AI, it might be hard for it to express those kind of human emotions in the same way that you as a person who knows the student would. But certainly for where you're just listing the information about your school, that's factual, so that would be relatively easy to use AI for. Again, don't know if you have anything extra on that, Courtney?
Yeah, I'd absolutely compliment that. So aside from the formatting, would just be more the actual content of the text as well, and particularly the box 3 of the reference, so where it's supporting information relevant to the student, actually using that to capture those kind of examples rather than being too concerned about the formatting. But again, I would echo as well, isn't something we formally would check as well, but yeah, I would kind of echo the point you made about what the actual content is, what's important.
Great, thank you very much. Was there anything else? I think we've read everything through in the chat. Nabia, I don't know if there was anything else from your end.
No, thank you, Becca and Courtney. Actually, thank you for taking out your time and collaborating with us and answering all these questions and preparing these slides. This has been like really helpful